Chinese President Xi Jinping, who is also the General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, has called on political parties around the world to build a community with a shared future for mankind. Xi Jinping made the remarks while delivering a keynote presentation on Friday at the opening ceremony of the CPC in dialogue with the World Political Parties high-level meeting in Beijing. Also attending the meeting was Abhisit Vejjajiva, Prime Minister of Thailand from 2008 to 2011. And the current leader of Thailand's Democratic Party. Today, he joins us for a wide-ranging discussion on President Xi's remarks, democracy, corruption, the rule of law, and the nature of a political party, political power, as well as the current and the future relations between his country and China. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Before we get started, let's take a look at this background report.
Working together towards a community with a shared future for mankind and a better world, the responsibility of political parties. That's the theme of the CPC in dialogue with World Political Parties high-level meeting. Xi Jinping said no matter how the international landscape may evolve or how strong China may become, it will never pursue hegemony, expansion, or look to extend its sphere of influence. He said China is willing to work with other political parties for world peace and global development and to uphold the international order.
Over the next 5 years, we will provide opportunities for 15,000 personnel from the world's political parties to come to China for further exchanges. And we propose to institutionalize the Communist Party of China in dialogue with World Political Parties high-level meeting so it has extensive representation and is of significant international influence.
The dialogue is the first major multilateral diplomatic event hosted by China since October's 19th CPC National Congress. It's the first time the CPC has held such a high-level meeting, and it drew a significant number of the World Party leaders. Many of the delegates noted how it has historic significance both for the CPC and other political parties.
I think that he is taking a very brave step, trying to lead the world to think about global challenges in a cooperative manner.
I listened very carefully to Xi Jinping's speech. He emphasized that China is willing to share its experiences and learn from other political parties. What impressed me the most is that he said China will boost its development, provide more opportunities and bring more benefits to other countries.
Xi Jinping said the CPC has maintained close contact with more than 400 political parties and organizations in more than 160 countries. He said the CPC is willing to strengthen cooperation and exchanges with other political parties from across the globe and work together to build a community with a shared future for mankind and a better world. Su Yuting, CGTN, at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing.
Welcome to Dialogue, Your Excellency. Now, President Xi Jinping came up with a roadmap for more integration between the Chinese Communist Party and other political parties around the world. With the end of the Cold War, we no longer use ideology to take side politically, and therefore, what do you think of the growing consensus or momentum that characterizes our party-to-party diplomacy, particularly between the CPC and your Thai Democratic Party?
Well, in general, first, I should say that, as part of mankind, we all face common challenges. We're talking about issues ranging from climate change, economic inequality, poverty, political threats from terrorism, extremism, nationalism. So I think it is very appropriate that political parties, which have the duty of policy formulation and execution and providing, if you like, thoughts for its peoples, should come together and really consult about how we can overcome these challenges. And it's a very appropriate time because we see around the world that these common challenges are posing as threats economically and politically to the lives of our people. As for Thailand, we are no exception. The problems that I've mentioned, whether it's poverty, economic inequality, are very much at the top of people's minds. And there's so much that we can learn from each other. And as you say, these days you can learn these things and transcending the wide political spectrum or ideologies or even cultures, and also characteristics that may be unique to each country. Having said that, of course, it doesn't mean that we can have a ready-made formula that will work for all countries. And each country will need to learn and adapt as to how we can overcome these challenges.
On the issue of development and livelihoods for the underprivileged and underdeveloped, sure, we have a lot common language to share in order to usher in an era of a shared future. However, you are a democracy. China is a one-party political system, and President Xi Jinping says that we don't want to export the Chinese model. What do you think of the uniqueness of the Chinese institutions in navigating our own course independently instead of following Western democracies? I mean, this is a very controversial point on many occasions on my dialogue.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, there are, as I said, representatives across the world that came to this dialogue from different political ideologies. So we have conservatives, we have liberals, we have socialists, communists that are coming together. The point is, even the political system itself, multi-party, two-party, one-party, you have to make these systems work for each country. And when President Xi said that, you know, China does not import a model for her development process and her success, she has no intention of exporting either. That's a great recognition of the diverse factors, you know, cultural, historical, that are present in all countries. So for China and for Thailand and for any country, you know, we have to find our own path, our own solutions, but there will be common elements. And some of the things that we discussed during the meeting are directly relevant to what political parties do. So whatever system you're in, parties need to be responsive to people's needs, parties need to be in touch with people, parties need to show that they share the concerns of ordinary people, parties need to show that they have concrete solutions for people's problems. And parties also have to set examples in terms of transparency, being corruption-free, and, as I said, being very much in touch and responsive to people.
You put your finger on a crucially important point concerning whether the political system works or is it suitable or not for your national conditions individually. Well, as a political observer in the neighboring country of China, Thailand, who follows our political process very closely from perhaps 3 decades ago, do you believe the Chinese political institutions have been working very well for our country? I'm not talking about whether this model should be copied elsewhere, and in fact we are very modest, we have a deep sense of humility. So your thoughts on the impact of the Chinese model on our own development?
Well, I can tell you what people outside see. They see economic success. I think that's hard to argue with, given the rise of the economic clout of China as a whole. And they also see the party trying to respond. So, put it this way, in the 19th Congress, it's clear that the party is not happy to rest on past success. It knows that it needs to improve. And there have been many decisions and moves in the party dealing with issues like corruption, dealing with issues of how they can respond better to people's needs, and how they need to recognize that in order to retain people's trust, they have to be transparent. These are issues that are relevant to all systems and political parties. One of the things that I pointed out during the dialogue in the meeting is that actually there is a great decline in the trust of people in political parties all over the world. In fact, there is a decline in trust of the political class. And that's because mainly the economic system is failing a lot of people, and so they feel that politics is not working for them. And number two, when they see corruption, when they see politicians that place their own interests above the public interest, they begin to lose trust. And there is this gap developing between the political class and the ordinary people. So whether you are in a multi-party system, whether you're in a one-party system, all political parties need to rise up to this challenge and reduce that gap that has happened over the last maybe decade or so.
And I believe it's one of the major issues on the agenda for all political parties to look at during this conference in Beijing, the dialogue between CPC and other political parties around the world. The issue is the growing income disparity. Do you think it's the political institutions in the individual countries that should take the blame, or the issue of globalization itself?
Well, there are a number of factors that work towards inequality. Globalization is one, because when you open up trade, there are always winners and losers. And unless the government of each country deals with this process of opening up properly, and by properly I mean taking care of people who lose, allowing for a smooth adjustment or transition for people who lose to move into new sectors, you're going to have problems arising from trade liberalization. But trade and globalization is not the only factor to blame. Technology itself is disrupting a lot of economic activities. That can also lead to inequality. And there are also issues about the political economy in nature, like, for instance, the greater concentration of economic power, and especially in many countries where that concentration of power runs parallel in the economic and political realm, then it's going to be very difficult to address the issue of inequality.
Excellency, we don't want the issue of populism to steal the spotlight of our discussion here about the party-to-party diplomacy and our
But you see, it's important.
It is important
for political parties to respond to these populist threats.
We want our political forces to be responsive to the needs of the
that's
popular.
Right. And that's the only way
netizens.
To defeat populism.
Right. Political process in both Britain and the United States have been derailed seriously by the rise of populism, and they're going to turn to trade protectionism in times of crisis. So this is the common sense, but let me come back to examine further differences and similarities, if any, between your country and China, because you came here partly because, to attend the conference. You have adopted a constitutional monarchy. You have the highest paramount king, and you have different parties in the Congress. Do you think this has worked very well in your country? From the headlines of the media, we were so impressed by the dynamic and the vibrant protests in the streets. And a lot of the Chinese politicians and policymakers will say, hey, let's look to our neighboring country of Thailand. The street protests, what's the big deal? There's the inconsistency of policy execution, a lot of clashes between red shirts and the yellow shirts, elites and people from the rural areas, corruption charges, endless legal litigation. So the effectiveness of policy execution has been seriously undermined from the perspective of the Chinese, at least. So I'd like to have your take on whether democracy should be prioritized, and you should first and foremost be a democratic jihadist to safeguard the principles, whatever the costs.
Well, I come from the Democrat Party. We were founded on liberal democratic principles. We do believe that allowing people to determine their own future and the future of their country is very important. Having said that, we fully recognize that democratization and democracy is not something that can always guarantee results. And there has to be a learning process. We have to go through ups and downs. There may be setbacks, and oftentimes we have to take a look at ourselves and see how we can change the way we do things. So from our perspective, the problems and some of you may say failure of the last decade or so in Thai politics, you cannot say it's because of democracy as such, because the root of the problem starts when people do not respect some of the principles of democracy, particularly people in power. That's when the protests got started, and then it became more difficult to deal with the political conflicts. But now we are in a process where we need to move out of this cycle, and that's why there's so much discussion about reforms that are needed in the country now. And as I say, we have to go through this learning process and make democracy work.
Thank you so much. You are watching Dialogue with His Excellency, Mr. Abhisit Vejjajiva, Prime Minister of Thailand from 2008 to 2011. We'll be back in a short while. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. We are joined here by Mr. Abhisit Vejjajiva, Prime Minister of Thailand from 2008 to 2011. Welcome back, Your Excellency. Let's look at the role of the military. Recently, there's an alleged coup in Zimbabwe where the oldest politician, Robert Mugabe, was ousted from his office by the military because of power struggle. Immediately, the African Union accused the military of that country of being involved militarily in politics, and that's taboo for Africans. What do you think of the role of the military for young democracies? Professor Samuel Huntington said in many of his articles and books, in Latin America, for example, the military would always step in to stabilize the situation during transitional period. I mean, political and social transformation would always cause street protests, seriously disrupting the investment environment. So the military would say, hey, enough is enough. However, in the case of Thailand, we are wondering aloud if the king is the paramount or the military.
We see in the past, first of all, to say that especially His late Majesty has been very instrumental in solving some of the most important crises politically that the country has faced. And military coups over the past 6-7 decades.
How many military coups did you have since the end of the Second World War?
Too many. Too many. But I think it's clear that whenever we have a coup, and when we have a regime that is in place like we have now, the understanding is it can only be a transitional or temporary arrangement, that somehow they need to return power to the people according to a certain timetable, which is what they are now promising. So coups and military intervention must still be seen as exceptions. Now, it's always easy to just criticize the military or people who come in and intervene, but equally important, it's also important to take a look at the role of politicians and political parties that have led to the coup. And that is, I think, the more important lesson that we and other developing democracies need to learn. And that is, whenever you have elected politicians in power, they must somehow not abuse their mandate. They must somehow not create conditions that could lead to instability and possibly even chaos and violence, which would then open the door for military intervention. I think that's the most important lesson that we have to learn. And it's interesting to note that around the world now, some of the abuses of rights and the principles of democracy are being committed by elected politicians. So we're in a different game now.
Let's look at Myanmar. It is said to be some kind of democracy. After all, Aung San Suu Kyi has been elected into office through the popular vote. But the military keeps its formidable presence in the parliament, in the government, in the legislation, everywhere. Do you believe, in your review, that the military somehow deserves credit for maintaining social stability? Without the necessary evil, quote-unquote, of having the social stability, no one would run the risk of putting money or investment in this young or vibrant democracy. Do you think this has some ring of truth?
Well, look, I'll speak from experience. My preference would have been for the military not to step in. But I have to concede that for the majority of people, when a situation like in Thailand before the coup happens, so many people could not see a way out. So many people could not see a resolution. So
in other words, you do believe the military is the necessary evil?
No, I don't actually. I don't think it's necessary. But I think it's much, much harder to be able to build an alternative process to resolve situations like that. At the time, before the coup, I was speaking to our opponents, asking them that it's time for us to agree on some kind of transitional arrangement that would allow the country to move forward without slipping into some kind of military coup. But they didn't listen to me, they didn't agree with me, they thought that they could keep their grip on power, and so eventually there was a deadlock. So my point is, it is not necessary, but in order to avoid this kind of scenario, political parties, media, ordinary people need to build up a new culture, political culture if you like, when there is conflict and when there is chaos and when there is even possibly violence in the streets, as to how we can resolve those situations.
Why does the royal family enjoy such a high respect and authority in shaping the future of your country, even if you have such a formidable military lurking behind?
Well, that's because the monarchy has been what we say the soul of the nation.
I see.
Unites everybody, transcends all kinds of diversity or conflicts, and of course proven to have really served the people throughout the years. We couldn't, I mean, Thailand couldn't have got this far without the stability and the wisdom and the guidance of the monarchy, particularly His late Majesty.
Thailand is described as a country of smiles. Buddhism remains such a powerful source of conviction and faith for a majority of Thai people. But still you have these clashes between the yellow shirts and the red shirts that somehow leads us to believe Thai boxing is involved in politics. Thai boxing is so vicious.
No, I think the problem, if we trace the crisis back to its roots, was when, as I said, we had an elected government that didn't quite recognize that a democratic government only has limited power. It overreached. It tried to make the instruments of the state, the police, the revenue department, become political tools, political instruments. It interfered with the media, it interfered with the judiciary or independent organizations. So people who did not agree with the government had very few alternatives but to take to the streets. That's where all the trouble started. If we appreciate that lesson, politicians and political parties need to recognize that the mandate they win in elections is a mandate to work for the people, not a license to abuse power or engage in corruption.
Does the military respect the religious leaders?
Yes, I think we all respect our religious leaders, and as you say, Buddhism and other religions also in Thailand can be very helpful in trying to bring people together.
Now let's take a look at the South China Sea and ASEAN. Well, China's diplomacy seems to have won the first chapter of the competition between the United States and China. The United States uses the excuse of protecting freedom of navigation and overflight as the groundwork for which their military vessels are sent into this turbulent water to allegedly protect the primacy or their primetime primacy. What do you think of the consensus that ASEAN has been able to build? And what do you think of the diplomacy of China in building the cohesiveness and the consensus? Do you think China has divided or helped cement members of ASEAN throughout this process?
I think ASEAN and its integration program is something that's far, far bigger than the issue, a single issue, or the issue of the South China Seas. I think the dispute between the claimants are dispute between claimants. ASEAN is not party to the dispute. Those disputes should be resolved according to the principles of international law, and they should be resolved peacefully. What ASEAN should do, like what the international community should do, including all the superpowers and outside countries, is to ensure that the disputes are resolved in this way, peacefully and according to international law, and that there would be peace, there would be the ability to navigate and allow the direct claimants, those party in disputes, to engage in their own process. I think if ASEAN takes its stance and has this role defined for itself, then the South China Sea issue would not be something that would divide ASEAN or actually be an obstacle to ASEAN integration. And ASEAN wants to be to practice open regionalism. So ASEAN cannot just say we just take care of members and therefore we will take sides. Rather, we uphold the necessary principles and we engage with our dialogue partners, of which China is one.
During the Cold War, Thailand and Vietnam were our loggerheads. You almost went to war during some clashes along the border. Were a senior government official from Hanoi able to come up to you and say, "Hi, buddy, Mr. Vejjajiva, can you give us some advice about how to deal with the Chinese Communist Party on the maritime disputes in South China Sea"? What would you say to your
Well, I would say what I just
friend?
said to you, which is that there has to be a process to resolve this in a peaceful way, a process that everybody can agree upon, and it's not for other countries to take side or interfere. But what we would do as neighbors, what we would do as part of ASEAN, is to ensure that this process takes place and that the whole dispute does not disrupt trade, disrupt engagements among countries.
And do you think a peaceful solution remains the basic and the most fundamental principle of a COC, Code of Conduct?
Yes, I do, and yes, I do. And you know, we go back to the conference that I had been in over the last few days. You know, there is this recognition that multilateralism is important,
Right.
that respect and sovereignty is important, and this goes with other issues. Why are we trying to resist protectionism, nationalism, extremism, violence? To do so, we all need to have a different outlook and perspective on things, on issues, including this kind of dispute.
Are you and your party, the Thai Democratic Party, confident to win the next election?
We are going to do our best. I think anybody who can predict election results these days must be very, very brave. We believe we will do a lot better than last time, and we have a good chance of winning.
Do you think there's any chance for Yingla and her brother to make a political comeback and get involved in the political process by the Constitution?
They are legally barred from taking part, but former Prime Minister Thaksin clearly has continuing strong influence on the party, our opponents. So they will still have political influence, but direct involvement or participation is not possible according to the law.
Thank you so much. Good luck. With that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue with Mr. Abhisit Vejjajiva, Prime Minister of Thailand from 2008 to 2011. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.